Aid and I are fourth year MPharm students at the University of Birmingham, and we are doing this presentation as part of our elective module, which is a period of time that we spend in an area that we find interesting, and we've both chosen the yellow card scheme. So in this presentation, we're going to cover what adverse drug reactions are and what pharmacovigilance is, what the yellow card centre is and what they hope to achieve, how to fill in a yellow card and what to report on a yellow card, the misconceptions about reporting on yellow cards, and how technology can have an influence in the future of the yellow card. And most importantly, we hope that you'll gain something that you can hopefully implement into your practice as an undergraduate, pre-registration, or qualified pharmacist or healthcare professional. So drugs cause harm, and we know that drugs cause harm, but the harm can vary, the severity of the harm can vary. For example, this is a picture of a patient from City Birmingham Hospital who developed toxic epidermal necrolysis as a result of the administration of phenytoin. Another adverse drug reaction that you may be aware of is thalidomide, which was in 1964. So in 1964, pregnant mothers who were taking thalidomide, it was discovered that the babies being born when the mother was taking the medication had limb abnormalities. And this was a key milestone in the development of the yellow card scheme. And this was when it was actually discovered. And this was the key ADR that prompted a greater interest into adverse drug reactions. So what is an adverse drug reaction? So an adverse drug reaction is defined by the World Health Organization as a response to a medicinal product which is noxious and unintended. And by that, it means that it's a harmful, poisonous, or unpleasant response, and that wasn't intended from the clinical indication of the medication. This World Health Organization definition had some ambiguity surrounding it. So the European Medicines Association further defined it as a reaction that may arise from the use of the product within or outside of the terms of the terms of the marketing authorization. So that means it's either on license or off license, as well as overdoses, or from occupational exposure. So cost of ADRs. So ADRs are a major cause of hospital admissions in the UK, and these ADRs can ultimately affect patients' quality of life, not only due to the hospital admission, but also possibly due to the long-standing consequences of ADRs, if applicable. ADRs costs the NHS hundreds of millions of pounds, not from treating the ADR through to the hospital admission associated with the ADR. ADRs are also associated with several hundred deaths per year, and up to 15% of hospital inpatients have their stay prolonged. So pharmacovigilance is the practice of monitoring the effects of medicinal drugs after they've been licensed for use, especially in order to identify and evaluate previously unreported adverse reactions. So what happens is when a new drug is discovered, it may enter a clinical trial where it goes from in vitro to in vivo models. And in these clinical trials, they may contain around 1,000 patients. The gender tends to be towards men and the age around 30. Patients with comorbidities and taking multiple medications, so polypharmacy, they're often excluded from the study protocol. The duration of treatment is often shorter. It can be shorter than, say, for example, if a medication is intended to be used for the chronic management of a condition. As well as this, special groups of patients, so the young, the old, pregnant and breastfeeding may also be excluded from the study protocol. And what happens is that the product is then licensed with a limited number of known side effects that are seen in the clinical trial. And a black triangle is assigned to the medication. And it's important to note that all new drugs are always assigned black triangle status until the first periodic safety review. And I'll further go on later to discuss what a black triangle drug is. So in the real world, the patient may be older than 30. They may have multiple disabilities. They may be taking multiple medications. And this ultimately means that new unknown side effects can be established by using these in a real world situation. However, it can be difficult to link this to the drug, and the sharing of information can be slow. And as a result of this, lots of harm can occur. And that's where the yellow card scheme comes in. So by you reporting adverse drug reactions on the yellow card scheme, it means that the ADR is picked up. So what is a black triangle drug? So a black triangle drug is a drug that is subject to additional monitoring by the MHRA. And it can include new and old drugs. So for example, an old drug is sodium valproate that's been assigned a black triangle. And it can also include biosimilar drugs, biologics, and vaccines. And if the drug is a black triangle drug, an inverted black triangle can be found in the BNF, the SPC, and the patient information leaflet. And also, if someone doesn't have access to these resources, there is also a list on the government website, and that's something that Zaid will speak about later on. So the MHRA rely on signals, and a safety signal is information on an adverse drug reaction that requires further investigation. And these signals come from spontaneous reports. So in the UK, these spontaneous reports are called yellow cards. But the data and the signals also comes from clinical studies and scientific literature. And these signals are assessed by signal assessors. And the signal assessors see if the drug was the cause. And that's an important thing to note, is that when reporting ADRs, the people reporting the ADR do not have to be convinced that the reaction or the ADR was caused by the drug. They just need to be suspicious, as it's the job of the signal assessors to establish a causal relationship. And therefore it's very important to include as much detail as possible when reporting on yellow cards. And pharmacovigilance is reliant on the information from spontaneous reports to create these signals. So the yellow card scheme is the MHRA run ADR reporting scheme. And it's a secure system whereby the reporter details and the patient details are confidential and secure. The reports are spontaneous and only suspicions are reported. And it can provide early warnings of ADRs. And most importantly, it provides real-world data. So the yellow card scheme collects reports of suspected problems or incidences involving side effects of medicines, as previously mentioned, medical device adverse incidents. So for example, if an inhaler isn't actuating appropriately. It also involves defective medicines. So for example, those that aren't of an acceptable quality, meaning that the tablet shape may be misshapen, the color may not be as uniform across the batch, as well as packaging that's defective. So it can include writing that's too small, or maybe a batch number that's not present. As well as this, counterfeit and fake medicines or medical devices also need to be reported on yellow cards. And this is despite the Falsified Medicines Directive implementation. And also, side effects or safety concerns from e-cigarettes should also be reported on yellow cards. So how do we actually fill in a yellow card? So we can fill in a yellow card online using the yellow card, using a website, which is yellowcard.mhra.gov.uk. And this is the desirable way of filling in a yellow card, as it captures all of the essential information required to make a report valid. And Zaid will later go on to discuss what makes a report valid. There's also a paper yellow card at the back of the BNF, which can be posted to the Yellow Card Centre for free, as well as an app that is useful as it captures all of the essential information, just like the online version. However, it can be stored in a convenient place on your phone. So this is just a video about why we should report adverse drug reactions. And this was created by the Irish Academy of Continuing Medical Education. And it's important to mention that the regulator there is the Irish Medicines Board, which isn't the same here, where it's the MHRA.
Why report adverse drug reactions? Let's look in a simple way at the difference between reporting and not reporting a suspected adverse drug reaction. First, what may happen if you don't report an ADR? You prescribe medicine X for a patient at a dose of 2 tablets per day. He returns a few days later with symptoms you think are due to an ADR. You change his medication and keep an eye on him don't report the ADR to the Irish Medicines Board. The ADR may not be severe, but it may be non-reversible, or later escalate into something severe. In a practice across town, another doctor prescribes X, and a similar reaction occurs. A scenario may be replicated worldwide, and possible long-term ADRs may affect large numbers of people. There may even be fatal cases that could have been avoided, not to mention costs and quality of life issues. Medicine X, despite being a promising agent, potential advantages over other alternatives, falls out of use. Now start over with your patient and see how reporting benefits everyone. You prescribe medicine X for a patient at a dose of 2 tablets per day. He returns a few days later with symptoms you think are due to an ADR. You change his medication and keep an eye on him. This time, you do report the ADR to the IMB using your surgery laptop in a matter of minutes. Other Irish doctors are also finding the same ADR and reporting it to the IMB. Doctors in countries worldwide are finding the same ADR and reporting it to their own regulatory authorities. The IMB liaises with other regulatory authorities in Europe and across the world, including the WHO. Together, they communicate with the company responsible for marketing Medicine X. All previous data, including clinical trials and current reports, are reviewed. It is agreed that the dose should be cut from 2 tablets to 1 tablet. The company changes the packaging and information leaflets and notifies doctors, pharmacists, and other healthcare professionals. Doctors can now have greater confidence in considering Medicine X as a treatment option. And patients using Medicine X are less likely to suffer adverse reactions. Play your part in making sure that medicines are used safely.
Okay, great. I'll just
And over to you, Zaid.
Is that working now? Can you see it?
Not yet.
No. Still nothing?
Zaid, if you're having problems, I will share from here.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, Zaid, over to you.
Yeah. Could you go back to the slide before with the diagram? That's fine. Yeah. So thank you for that. So following on from what Joe has been talking about in that video, we have this diagram here. This quite nicely sums up the thought process that should be going through someone's mind when they look at an ADR or suspect an ADR, and kind of the general foundations of what you should be thinking about when you look at an ADR. So next slide, please. So when you suspect an ADR and you're trying to think, what do you report? Joe mentioned about black triangle drugs and the difference between the established drugs and the black triangle drugs. So for these established drugs, we typically want to report serious reactions, or we use the term medically significant reactions, which I'll talk about later on in the next slide. But for and obviously these serious reactions, even if they were recognized, you should still be reporting them for the established drugs. But it's important to note that you should be reporting any suspicion. It doesn't have to be anything, any kind of casualty that has to occur before you make a report. It's really the earliest, the better, really, to gather the data like that. And obviously, as Joe mentioned, and I'll talk about in the future slides about the validity of reports, you want to include as much detail as possible about the reaction so that MHRA can collect that data and process it accordingly. Next slide, please. So we have, I mentioned that term, medically significant ADRs that occur in the more established drugs. And this kind of umbrella term means it can be up for debate and different terms of interpretation, but it's really any kind of reaction that requires, obviously, like hospital admission, or requires you to contact your GP or visit your local pharmacy in need of any kind of medical treatment. And that's kind of the things we would consider medically significant and serious enough to make a yellow card report. But for the established drugs, when you're looking at those black triangle drugs, the ones that are under additional monitoring, then it's really any kind of reaction, no matter how severe, should be reported. So even if it's something like some itchiness or a minor rash that you don't feel it's significant enough to make a report or to see a healthcare professional, the MHRA would still like you to fill out a yellow card report for that drug, for that black triangle drug, so they can collect more and more data about that drug and build up its portfolio and get more of a sense of real world data for that drug. And it goes without saying that if you're a patient in those special groups that don't take part in clinical trials, like if you're a pregnant woman or you're a child or elderly patient, then the reports you make from these black triangle drugs are even more significant and play an even bigger role in terms of the portfolio of that drug. And if you're wanting to see the list or the current list of black triangle drugs, there are lots of sources around, but the government website surprisingly provides a really comprehensive list, an up-to-date list every month. It updates with the current black triangle drugs, the ones that have recently been finished off and they're now not under additional monitoring, and ones that have recently come under additional monitoring. So it's quite a useful website to look through. Next slide, please. So there are four main aspects that make a report valid for the MHRA to process your yellow card report. The first one is patient details. And this is important to note that it's very brief patient details so that the patient cannot be identified, as the yellow card scheme is an anonymous scheme that allows no patient to be identified by their details. So just something like an initial would be enough, and you don't need anything like a full name or an NHS number or an address or anything like that. Simply an initial will be sufficient enough. The second point to make the report valid is the key details of the reaction, and this is probably the most important part of your report, but it's a part that can be subject to interpretation of how much detail is enough. And really, it's just you want to make sure that you provide a good picture and a good story of the ADR. Obviously, the more detail, the better. And obviously, but it depends on some people's scientific terminology may vary. But I really just want to give a sense of what the reaction is, where it is, the time frame, and these kind of things to ensure the report is valid to be processed. The third point is the drug involved in the ADR. Obviously, things like product details like the batch number are ideal, but not essential for the report to be valid. The main thing here is you want to include the specific name of the drug, the brand as well if possible, but you don't want to be saying, oh, this patient took an antibiotic or a painkiller in your report. You want to state, oh, they took amoxicillin or they took codeine. You want to make sure the brand, you name the brand. And the final point is just the reported details. So your name and a contact number, like a contact phone number or an email address. And this I'll talk about in the next slide about misconceptions about the scheme. But this is just in case the MHRA want to contact you, in case to follow up on your report, to confirm some details about your report. Next slide, please. So yeah, so the misconceptions, I'll start with the being contacted by the MHRA. This is something very, very rare to happen, but it really only occurs when you've missed out a key bit of information in your report, or the MHRA just want to follow up on your report. There's no obligation for you to provide that additional information, but it's very rare this even happens in the first place. But the MHRA won't be pestering you like that. It's just really to confirm they've got the right details in the report and can be processed accordingly. Another big misconception is the fact of duplicate reports. So some reporters may be hesitant to make a report if they discover the ADR late, as they may assume someone's already made a report and they don't want to double the work of the MHRA. And it's something that really shouldn't restrict you from making a report, because the system actually automatically detects duplicate reports in the same patient and the same reactions. So really, if there's any doubt about if a report was made, you should make that report anyway. And it goes really hand in hand with the main catchphrase of the yellow card scheme, which is really, if in doubt, fill one out. So you should never be deterred to make a report and feel that, oh, someone's probably already beaten me to it. You should always make that report, and it's better to be safe than sorry. And then there's that general grey area about suspicion of an ADR and allergic reaction. Really, if you suspect an ADR and you think you should be making a yellow card report, someone else have that same suspicion, and shouldn't. It should encourage each other to make those yellow card reports. And I mentioned in the previous slide about the anonymous patient details. You should really ensure to your patients that if you were to make a yellow card report about their ADR, that their data will not be identifiable and it will be all anonymous and confidential, and none of the data will be misused by the MHRA. And as Joe previously mentioned, as well as traditional drugs, things like vaccines and medical devices are also included in the yellow card reports. Next slide, please. So we use the term a reporting culture quite a bit. It goes hand in hand with the yellow card scheme, and it's something that can always be improved, can always be developed, and it involves really the attitudes of reporters in healthcare settings and the techniques they use about making yellow card reports. So staff questionnaires are quite a useful foundation to get a grip, get an idea of where everyone's knowledge is with reporting and attitudes, the way they go about reporting, and things like that. As well as this also helps promote the yellow card scheme and serves as a good reminder if you hold this questionnaire every year, every 6 months, to analyze progress and implementations, success of those implementations. Landmark events like the Med Safety Week, which occurs in the first week of November, it's been running for about 5 years now, they're quite good annual events to show the progress of the yellow card scheme, as we recently surpassed our 1 millionth yellow card report. But they're quite good to inform professionals about the progress of the scheme and where the scheme's going to go in the future, which I'll talk about briefly towards the end of my presentation. And obviously, educating our patients is very important, as actually patients make up the largest proportion of reporters every year, to a surprise. And they're quite good at helping spread the word, telling their other family members and friends about ADRs and medicine safety and things like that. E-learning is also helps form the reporting culture. I'll talk about in one of the next slides. And it's quite a modern, recent thing that can help professionals build up their portfolio and their knowledge about not only ADR and yellow card reporting, but all kinds of things related to their personal development. And then I also, towards the end, linked to this, talk about COVID-19 and the facts, the impact it's had and the potential opportunities created for ADR reporting in the whole medicine safety. So electronic prescribing systems is something very important and very relevant to the yellow card scheme. If developed correctly and in the near future, will be probably spread, rolled out internationally, nationally in the country. But integrating yellow card reporting into this e-prescribing systems will be very important to allow for a more smoother way of reporting and less hassle-free in terms of if a drug was stopped on a ward and you state the reason as ADR, then the yellow card report will be automatically sent with that. And obviously on the e-prescribing systems, you can have all the patient details readily available to you, things like the allergy details and the allergy history, the drugs they've been taken. You can create a way to identify black triangle drugs, to highlight that to prescribers and make them aware of this additional monitoring of the specialist drug. And obviously, with these black triangle drugs, they tend to be specialist drugs, and they're starting these specialist outpatient clinics. So the ability for e-prescribing systems to include outpatient data would be very important, to ensure that black triangle drugs, which are the drugs we want more data is more interested in, I want that to be included as well. So linked to what I've just been saying about the improvements for a more efficient reporting, that reporting culture is something that can always be improved and always developed to make reporting more efficient and more higher up on the priority list of everyone in the workforce. Developing e-prescribing systems is something in the future will be very important, and integrating yellow card reporting and identifying black triangle drugs, including outpatient data, will all be very important. And then obviously, these all go hand in hand with the NHS's main ambitions in the future to take prescribing online, take everything digitally, and to give patients more say in their treatment and make them more independent and more aware and more knowledgeable about their medicines, about how to make medicine safer and to make their treatment safer. Next slide, please. So I mentioned e-learning previously, and these are two common sites or providers that are used by universities, Scope and Script. So these are the links here, and I would encourage you to have a look at them if you haven't already. They're quite good at helping you achieve certificates and building your portfolio with small little modules, and to analyze your progress and see where you can make improvements in your gaps in your knowledge. And they're very important and very up to date and everything like that. Next slide, please. So with the future of the yellow card scheme, so I mentioned about COVID-19, and it really has created a landmark point in time for obviously everyone involved, but for ADR reporting specifically, because not only professionals, but also the general public have probably never been as aware as they have been about the MHRA and the role that they do, about drug licensing, clinical trials, making ADR reports, vaccines, all these things. Probably people were as informed about these things as they've ever been. So to take the opportunity and really drive home the message about the importance of ADR reporting and the correct channels that they can go through will help have a lasting impact on obviously the current generation and the younger generations in terms of the importance of ADR reporting and everything that goes with that. So next slide, please.
Can we not see the next slide yet, Zaid?
No.
Are you having communication difficulties, Zaid?
Yeah, I think it's frozen. If you want, Joe can start with the quiz and I can try and refresh.
Joseph, do you wish to start the quiz then?
Yeah, if you could just allow me to share the screen.
Over to you then, Joseph.
Thank you. So we've just got a quick quiz on the adverse drug reactions. So if you could just put in the chat, so just a quick question. So have you completed a yellow card report in the last 12 months? So either pop a thumbs up if you have, or a thumbs down if you haven't, or just pop in the chat yes or no. Okay, and now just the next question. If anyone knows which antibiotic interacts with antidepressants, so if you just pop in 1, 2, 3, or 4 into the comments or into the chat function. Okay, so the answer is linezolide. So for example, citalopram being the antidepressant interacts with linezolide, and it can cause serotonin syndrome. So for example, here's a case study from City Hospital where a 65-year-old woman was taking a citalopram once daily and was acutely unwell in hospital. She was giving IV linezolide, 600 milligrams twice a day. And within 24 hours, she developed restlessness, sweating, tremor, shivering, myoclonus, diarrhea, high fever. And these symptoms are characteristic of serotonin syndrome. So another question, this was actually mentioned earlier. So does anyone know what the adverse drug reaction noted here is and what sort of drugs can cause it? So if you just pop any sort of ADR that you think it is or drugs in the chat function. So yeah, I can actually see quite a lot of the correct answers coming through. So it's toxic epidermal necrolysis, which is sometimes called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. The two are slightly different from each other, with the degree of so how much skin coverage is actually how much skin is affected. So some drugs are toxic epidermal necrolysis, or TEN, can be caused by an infection, but some drugs are also commonly associated with it. So sulfur drugs, anticonvulsants, so a lot of our antiepileptics, such as phenytoin and carbamazepine, as well as piroxicam, allopurinol, and nevirapine. So another question here. So does anyone know what the adverse drug reaction here is called and what sort of drugs can cause it? So the answer here is that angioedema is the adverse drug reaction, and a drug that is commonly associated, well, not commonly, but a drug that's associated with angioedema are ACE inhibitors. So this is another question here, and there was actually a drug safety update about this. So does anyone know what the adverse drug reaction here is and what sort of drugs can cause this? I'll also put the link to the drug safety update website into the chat function once we've finished the quiz. So the adverse drug reaction is that there is an increased risk of lower limb amputations, so specifically toes, with SGLT2 inhibitors. And this is the drug safety update for that. So another question. So does anyone know what the drug safety update was with buscopan or hyoscine, butyl bromide? So there is actually an increased risk of myocardial infarction with specifically in patients with underlying cardiac disease. Another question, does anyone know what the adverse drug reaction here is and what sort of drugs can cause it? So the adverse drug reaction here is that, so the drug that mainly causes this is sodium valproate. And the adverse drug reaction is an increase in curly hair. And just to note here that the person displayed in the picture doesn't have epilepsy. This is just another question. This is the last question. So someone died from consuming too much caffeine. Would you report this on a yellow card? So the answer here is actually no, because it's caused by coffee. So coffee being a food product, we wouldn't report it. However, if it was a herbal tea, for example, or a herbal remedy or something like Pro Plus that contains caffeine and was being used medically, then it would be reportable on a yellow card. So I hope you found that quiz useful. So I'll quickly upload a short feedback link into the chat, and upon completing this, we'll send you an authorized certificate of attendance, and that will be that's quite useful for diversifying your professional portfolio, as well as being useful for continuing professional development. So just to finalize, if you suspect an adverse drug reaction, remember the motto: if in doubt, fill one out. The Yellow Card Centre West Midlands is also available on Twitter and Instagram using the following at YellowCardWM. And that is there we're updating and we're putting regular drug safety updates there. So now we open up the floor to any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joseph and Zaid, for that complete presentation on the basics of pharmacovigilance. If anyone has any questions, please type them in the chat, and Zaid and Joseph and Karam and I do our best to answer them for you. So one question here is, what is the difference in the role of e-prescribing versus electronic health record in ADR reporting?
I can let you answer that, Christopher, if you want. I'm not too
So, as Zaid said, integration of e-prescribing systems and ADR reporting is not complete. Most of our GPs in the region have only been able to send in yellow card reports from their e-prescribing systems since the last few months. In the hospital in which the centre is based, doctors can indicate in the e-prescribing system that they're stopping a drug, and that the reason they're stopping a drug is because it's an adverse drug reaction, but they can't actually just then press the button to submit a yellow card. So it's something which, if your system allows it, makes the reporting much easier. But if not, then you have to use one of the other methods that I mentioned to report an ADR. Question here is, which drugs can cause Stevens-Johnson syndrome or toxic epidermal necrolysis? Anyone wish to tackle that question? There are a number of drugs linked to this ADR. Sulfur drugs, one, anticonvulsants, particularly phenytoin and carbamazepine, Pacam, allopurinol, virapine have all been linked with TEN.
There's just another question about can students report? So I don't know if you want to answer that, Zaid or Joseph.
So yes, actually, anyone can report on a yellow card. That can be healthcare professionals, students, and the public. They can all report on yellow cards. So I will actually pop into the chat function a link to a training website for filling in yellow cards, just so that if someone hasn't filled in a yellow card before, they can just just see how it looks and stuff.
So we're also on Twitter if anybody is on there, and we're going to share the link on our Twitter page as well. And there's also a weekly quiz on adverse drug reactions, so it's good for revision and things like that.
Any more questions for any of us? When will we receive the certificate? The answer to that is after you've completed the feedback form, which Joseph has put a link in this chat, and on completion of the form, out certificates next week, together with a link to our YouTube page, which will have the link to this presentation if you wish to watch any of it again. Twitter account is, somebody has asked, and that is @yellowcardwm. If there are no more questions, then thanks everyone for your attendance today. I hope you found something useful in this presentation, something you can utilize. And big thanks to Joseph and Zaid, who have put the presentation together. And thanks to them. We do have other presentations coming up. So watch our Twitter feed and you'll find out details of that. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Christopher.